The drawer slammed hard enough that I felt it through the floor before I really registered the sound. I was standing on the second floor of the old municipal records building on South Cameron, halfway down this taped-off hallway that was supposed to be sealed until the contractors came back in the morning. The weird thing about that building, and I mean weird in a very practical sense, not a ghost story sense, was how sounds behaved up there. On the first floor, everything carried. You coughed near the loading dock, and it came back at you from the stairwell. On the second floor, some sounds died right away, and some bounced too far, like there were hollow spaces where there shouldn't have been. So when that metal filing drawer slammed somewhere ahead of me, one clean hard bang, and then nothing, it felt wrong immediately. Not spooky, just wrong. The hallway smelled like wet drywall and bleach. The heat had been clicking on and off all night unevenly, and that corridor was one of the cold ones. I remember my flashlight feeling slick in my hand because I'd just come in from checking one of the storage rooms downstairs, and my gloves were damp around the fingertips. And I remember standing there listening for a follow-up sound that never came. That was the part that got me, actually, not the slam. The fact that it sounded like someone had done it on purpose and then stood perfectly still. I work private contract security, or I did back then. And this was one of those 12-hour overnight posts you're supposed to be grateful for because nothing ever happens. Half-renovated municipal building, flood damage from the previous spring, a bunch of city records boxed and moved, temporary fencing around the rear loading dock, and one bored guy with a flashlight making sure nobody stole copper or slept inside. That was the job. I was in my early 30s then and still trying to be the kind of security guard who treated every post like it mattered. My father used to tell me, patterns matter more than people, meaning people lie, people forget, people improvise, but patterns tell you what a place is doing. So I kept a notebook from every assignment. Not an official log, I did the official stuff too, but my own notebook. Temperatures, odd noises, lights left on, delivery schedules, anything that repeated. If you're laughing, fair enough. Anybody who's done overnight work knows you either get a system or you get sloppy. My shift that night started a little before dusk. I had my old Navy lunch bag with a bent zipper tab, a store-brand coffee that tasted like hot pennies, and the same black field notebook I always carried in my jacket pocket until I got to the desk. My dashboard vent in my car had been cracked for months, so the heat only hit the windshield and my right knee on the drive-in. Small, glamorous details of the profession. The building itself was 3 stories, mostly empty, with a front lobby that still looked official enough to fool people if they didn't go any farther. Upstairs was where the flood hit hardest. A lot of offices had taped plastic hanging across the doorways, and the city had stacked salvage bins along the walls with those orange contractor signs that say "Do not enter unless you enjoy being ignored by literally everybody." My normal routine was simple. Check the rear doors, do a first-floor sweep, log temperatures in the storage rooms where they were trying to keep what hadn't been ruined, then work upward. About an hour into shift, I found a side office light on behind plastic sheeting. Somebody had left it burning. I ducked under the tape, shut it off myself, clicked my recorder, and said something like electricians trying to run up the city bill again. Real top-shelf material. I was in a good mood. Bored but good. When I came back out, I saw muddy footprints on the tile, not a full trail. Just a few clear prints, dark brown, work boot tread, leading across the hall toward a locked records room door and stopping there. I crouched down and looked at them because that's what you do when you're by yourself and trying not to feel dumb. The mud was still a little tacky. I touched one with my glove. Fresh enough. But the records room was locked. I checked it, still locked. No return prints, nothing down the hall. Just those few marks ending at the door like whoever made them had stepped through it. I told myself a contractor had tracked mud in earlier, and housekeeping had done a lazy job around it. Then I wrote it down anyway. Now, anybody who's worked an overnight post in a city building knows your whole life is talking yourself into ordinary explanations. If you don't do that, every loose hinge becomes a conspiracy. So when I heard the drawer slam upstairs later on, I went back up expecting to find exactly that. Loose equipment, a bad latch, maybe an HVAC vibration knocking something around. The second floor was colder then, noticeably colder. The contractor warning signs across the taped-off hall had been folded inward, not ripped, just bent in, like somebody had pushed through and let them fall back. I stood there for a second and listened. The heating system clicked twice somewhere in the walls. Then it shut off completely. Not faded, not cycled down, it just stopped. For exactly 7 seconds, and yes, I counted, because when you spend enough nights in buildings, you count silences without meaning to. No vents, no hum, no compressor, nothing from outside. Just the soundlessness of a big place holding still. Then the copier started. It was farther down the hall, in a little records annex that had mostly been gutted. I saw the green light come on before I rounded the corner. Then paper started spitting out, one blank page after another, slapping into the tray. I actually felt relieved for a second because electrical problems I understand. Flood-damaged building, half the wiring exposed, old municipal equipment, sure, great, fine, annoying, but fine. I walked over, hit the stop button, and it kept going. I opened the side panel, still going. I pulled the plug out of the wall myself, full arm motion, cord in my hand, and the copier kept printing blank pages. That was beat one for me, even if I didn't call it that in my head. That was the first time my brain had to catch up to my body, because my body had already decided this wasn't normal. My shoulders went tight, my mouth got dry. I remember swallowing and feeling nothing happen. The pages kept coming for maybe another 6 or 7 sheets after I unplugged it. Then it stopped, just stopped. I stood there holding the cord like an idiot. And this is where I made the choice I still get irritated with myself for. I should have backed out, waited for police, and kept eyes on the exits. That would have been clean procedure. Instead, I radioed dispatch and said I might have a trespasser inside, possibly a contractor return, and that I was checking the second floor offices. I even kept my tone calm because I didn't want to sound jumpy over a copier. That was me being proud. That's the truth of it. I didn't want to be the guy who called a false alarm because a machine malfunctioned in a broken building. As I started checking rooms, I found a backpack shoved under a conference table in one of the offices. Plain dark backpack, nothing special. Inside was bottled water, work gloves, a granola bar, and a thick stack of printed city employee schedules. Some names were circled. Arrival times were highlighted in yellow. At first I thought maybe contractor access times or building personnel lists. Then I looked closer and saw some of the highlighted arrival times were for dates that hadn't happened yet. Future dates. Specific mornings, specific names. That sat wrong in a way I can't really dress up for you. It didn't feel like paperwork anymore. It felt like planning. I radioed dispatch again, more clearly that time, and asked for police to step it up. While I was doing that, I heard footsteps running overhead. Fast, from one end of the ceiling to the other. There was no 4th floor. There wasn't even a partial access level up there. Mechanical space, yes, but not walkable from where I was, and definitely not enough for full running footsteps. Still, when you are in it, your mind reaches for anything. Maybe scaffolding outside. Maybe roof crew equipment shifting. Maybe the sound bounced weird. I told myself all three in about seconds. Then I went back toward the stairwell instead of leaving. Again, not my best work. The moral version is that I thought someone might be hiding, and I didn't want them getting out another way. The honest version is I also didn't want dispatch hearing me panic. I had already called it in. I wanted to be able to say I checked thoroughly. Professional pride can make you very stupid in a very calm voice. As I moved, I patted my jacket for my notebook out of habit and realized it wasn't there. Then I remembered I'd left it at the security desk downstairs maybe 10 minutes earlier when I was logging storage temperatures. That shouldn't have mattered, except suddenly it did, because the thought came fast. If someone had been in the building watching me, they had been downstairs too. I checked the next office and found the locked records room standing open. I know it had been locked earlier. I checked it with my own hand. Now the door was cracked open about a foot, and the muddy prints I'd seen before looked darker under the fluorescent spill from inside. The room beyond had those rolling shelves they use for old case files. Only several rows had been pushed aside to create this narrow gap facing the hall. Not enough space to call it a room. More like a channel someone had carved out between the shelving. There was a folding chair in there, pointed straight toward the doorway, and sitting on the chair was a disposable camera. I picked it up, which I probably shouldn't have done. But by that point, my brain was just trying to identify what kind of threat I was dealing with. I clicked through enough frames to see photos of female city employees leaving the building at different times over several weeks. Parking lot shots, front entrance shots, one from inside the lobby looking out through the glass. I backed up without meaning to, and that was when I looked past the chair. Behind the shelving, pinned all along the back wall, were dozens more photographs. That was the peak of it for me. Not because it was loud, because it was so methodical. Rows of them. After hours, photos taken from inside the building. Employees leaving, custodians, contractors, women walking alone to cars, a city clerk I recognized from earlier in the week. The angle changed from picture to picture, but it was always from some hidden place inside the building. Then I saw one of myself at the security desk from the previous week, head down asleep, for what must have been maybe a minute or two near the end of a double shift. I still remember the shape my stomach made when I saw that. It just dropped out. Then the stairwell door slammed below me. I turned too fast and my shoulder hit the shelf. Somewhere in that movement, I realized my incident notebook was gone from the desk, not misplaced. Gone. I got into the hall and headed for the rear stairs, because that was the fastest route down to the loading dock, and the responding units should have been coming from that side. I hit the door and looked over the railing. There was a man standing one landing below me, dark contractor coveralls, no reflective tape, no hard hat. He was holding my notebook in one hand like he'd just picked it up to glance through it. He didn't rush me. That was almost worse. He looked up and asked, very calm, "How long you been writing things down?" I didn't answer. I don't even think I breathed. Then he said in my exact tone, "Patterns matter more than people. If you know how certain words sound when they belong to somebody else, you know what I mean when I say that did more to me than if he'd yelled." I bolted upward instead of down. That wasn't a plan, it was just what my legs did. I went through the unfinished section on the third floor, kicked through hanging plastic sheeting, and hit the renovation zone where the temporary flooring had been laid over part of the damaged area. I could hear him moving behind me, not running hard, just coming. My flashlight beam was all over the place. Open studs, buckets, scaffold poles, torn insulation, the smell of bleach and river mud and old paper. I climbed across the scaffolding toward the rear loading dock opening, because it was the only path that wasn't blocked. The boards under my boots flexed in a way they should not have. I got one leg over the outer rail, saw the wash of police lights through the temporary fence outside, and jumped the last stretch down to the dock. I hit hard enough to bite my tongue. Then part of the flooring behind me collapsed with this ugly cracking roll, like somebody kicking through dry ice, and a whole section of the temporary path dropped into the dark below. If I'd been 2 or 3 seconds slower, that would have been me going down with it. That was all the distance there was between me and whatever he planned. The officers found the building clear enough in the immediate sense. Clear meaning no man in coveralls standing around waiting to explain himself. They recovered the backpack, the chair, the camera, the photos. They took my notebook because it had been handled and because, frankly, I didn't want it back. They also found enough access irregularities to make everybody very interested in who had keys and who had contractor credentials. But interested and successful are two different things. They never identified him. That building ended solo overnight work for me, at least that kind of solo. I still did security after that for a while, but not isolated municipal contracts by myself in half-empty places where you could disappear between floors. And I still keep notebooks because my father's line wasn't wrong. Patterns do matter. I just don't write personal observations in them anymore, and before every shift I lock them in my trunk when I'm not actively using them. Call that overcorrecting if you want. I don't care. I also don't joke into recorders anymore. Small loss, probably. The part that still bothers me most isn't even the photo of me asleep, though that's a close second. It's the schedules. Police never figured out who the man was in those coveralls, but I still don't know how he had city employee arrival times for days that hadn't been posted yet. Story 5. The next one comes from a man who knew better long before he did anything about it. If you've never worked nights at one of those long-stay models down in South Louisiana, let me save you a little romance. It is not neon and mystery and truckers swapping stories in the rain. It's fryer grease that never leaves the curtains, swamp humidity that sits on your shoulders even after midnight, and old wall units rattling hard enough to make every room sound occupied when half of them aren't. I was doing security and desk coverage at a privately owned extended stay place outside Iberville Parish, down near the industrial corridor south of Plaquemine. Real glamorous property. Two-story horseshoe layout, cigarette burns on the stair rails, a vending machine that liked to eat fives, and a lobby coffee pot that made the same burnt smell whether it was fresh or not. Most of our guests were refinery guys, work crews, couples paying cash because they didn't want to use cards, and people who needed a week somewhere while they figured out the next week. I needed the job. That's the plain truth of it. My name's Lionel, and at that point in my life I was sending half my checks to my ex-wife in Baton Rouge every month without fail. Because I'd already messed up visitation once, and I wasn't giving a judge a second reason to look at me like I was optional. So when people ask why I didn't just quit the first time something felt off, well, because money has a way of making ugly things sound temporary. That's why. The owner was Maurice Tardieu. Greasy handshake, clean shirts, the kind of man who always spoke to you like you should feel lucky he remembered your name. Every now and then, Maurice would ask me not to log a visitor after midnight. Not erase one, just don't log them. He'd slide me extra cash at the end of the week and say it kept headaches off the books. I didn't like it, but I took it. That's the moral part right there if you want it simple. I suspected it was illegal before I let myself admit it was dangerous, and I still took the money. One of our regulars was a woman named Odessa Pike. Middle-aged, smoked those little clove cigarettes that smelled like a Christmas candle trying too hard. Always wore a denim jacket no matter how hot it got. She paid on time, minded her business, and asked more questions than most. She kept asking me why certain rooms were never available online, even when the lot looked half empty. Room 214 came up a lot in those conversations. Along with a few others, Maurice always marked maintenance occupied. Thing is, in 8 months there, I never once saw maintenance workers go into those rooms. At first I told myself Maurice was laundering occupancy numbers for tax reasons, or hiding unpermitted tenants, or some other white-collar slimeball thing that felt far away from me. Then I started noticing the check-ins for room 2214. Always one night, always cash, always somebody who brought no luggage. That was the first beat I couldn't make sit right in my head. People lie at motels. People say one person is staying and two do. People swear they're in town for work and then disappear before dawn. Fine, normal. But no luggage at all, not even a grocery bag, and then by morning the room looked like nobody had slept there. Bedding smooth, towels dry, little hotel soap untouched on the sink. I changed the sheets myself more than once, so I know what an untouched room looks like then. The vans started. Twice a week around 3 in the morning. Different vans would roll in without using the front entrance. They'd come along the side lane, kill the lights, back near the stairwell for the second floor, stay maybe 10 or 15 minutes, then leave. Different plates, different makes, same pattern. Maurice told me not to worry about it and once actually said, "You start asking too many questions. You start sounding unemployed." That's a good line, isn't it? Very efficient. One night I heard muffled arguing from 214, not TV arguing, real voices. Low tense cut off quick, then furniture scraping hard across the floor like a dresser being shoved. I called Faris at home and told him I was close to calling the sheriff. He got there in under 15 minutes, which was its own information. He went upstairs himself, came back down, and said it was drunk guests, and I'd better not embarrass the business by bringing in police over a domestic squabble that had already settled. Then he handed me extra cash, folded twice, and told me to get some food after shift. I took it. You can judge that however you want. I already have. A couple nights later, I was in the service corridor by the laundry room, doing a lazy check before dawn, and I heard crying through the bathroom vent. Quiet crying, but real. Not TV sound bleeding through, not the air unit. Somebody trying not to make noise and failing. The vent connected to 214. I went up there with my master key, stood outside, listened. Heard it again. Then I opened the room, empty, bed still smooth, curtains shut, bathroom dry, no shower steam, no damp towels, no bag, no person, nothing. I even checked behind the shower curtain, even though there was nowhere to stand back there. Just a little cracked tile and the smell of bleach and mildew. Shut the door and stood in that walkway, feeling like my own brain had slipped a tooth. Around then, Odessa started pushing harder. She caught me once while I was smoking near the ice machine and said those maintenance rooms weren't right. She said people checked in and were gone before sunrise and nobody at the desk ever acted surprised. I told her to mind her business. That's another line I still hear in my own voice. A little later, after one of those one-night guests cleared out, I let myself into 214 before housekeeping touched it. I don't know why that was the morning I did it instead of one of the earlier ones. Maybe because there had been too many little things in a row. Maybe because I was tired of pretending not to notice. The room looked empty at first glance. Then I checked the trash, plastic wrapping, heavy clear stuff wadded up, zip ties. 3 women's hair ties, black and brown, twisted together with the little metal joins bent out of shape. No makeup, no toiletries, no luggage tags, no normal person mess. I sat on the edge of that bed and finally decided I was going to call a deputy I knew from high school ball. Not officially, just enough to say, come have a look. Then Maurice shut down 214 the next day, marked it out of service, had the lock changed, told everybody there'd been plumbing issues behind the wall, and I let myself feel relieved. That's the false release part, I guess. I told myself maybe somebody complained up the chain. Maybe whatever side hustle he was running had moved on. Maybe the whole thing was uglier in my imagination than in reality. Right then, the ice machine by the stairwell had been unplugged for repairs for 2 days, and I remember standing there hearing it hum anyway, steady and low, and thinking I was just wound too tight from too many nights. That's how bad explanations work. They don't have to sound good. They just have to buy you another week. Then Odessa disappeared. The day before, she told me she'd followed one of the vans out to a warehouse near the river levee. She said it like she wanted me to react, maybe finally back her up, maybe tell her she was wrong. Instead, I told her she needed to stop playing detective around men she didn't know. She laughed at me, not kindly. That night, Maurice slept in the office with a shotgun across his lap. I saw him through the half-open door, shoes still on, eyes red. At some point near dawn, I heard him on the phone in the back room saying, "The guard already knows too much." Same night, he had that brand new locks put on the office filing cabinets. And 2 days after that, room 118 started getting the same short overnight visits 214 used to get. That was when the spiral really tightened. Because now there wasn't even the comfort of pretending one bad room had been shut down. It had just moved. I started reviewing the hall camera feeds whenever I could without Maurice seeing. Mostly junk footage. People hauling duffels, drunks missing their key cards, one guy trying to cook fish on a hot plate outside his room because his wife kicked him out. Then I found Odessa. She walked into the second-floor hallway on her own, looking alert, not dragged, not staggering, nothing dramatic. A woman in motel housekeeping colors met her outside 118 and said something I couldn't hear. Odessa went in with her willingly. Then the footage cut out. 19 minutes gone, just static timestamp, and then the feed resuming with an empty hallway. I replayed it 3 times because my brain wanted there to be a version where Odessa came back out on the frame edge and I just missed it. She didn't. That was the point where I stopped pretending I needed more evidence. I made an anonymous report and dumped everything in it. Vans, room numbers, the do not log visitors, Maurice, all of it. Then I quit. No speech, no confrontation. I left my keys in a desk drawer and walked off that property before my shift even officially ended. Deputies raided the motel not long after. They recovered evidence tied to trafficking logistics. That was the phrase I heard later, which somehow felt both precise and too small. Records, burner phones, restraints, route notes, things like that. No victims found there, no Odessa. And Maurice was gone before they got him. I didn't help the investigation much after that. Some of that was fear, some of it was shame. Mostly I think I couldn't stand hearing my own answers out loud. Yes, he paid me not to log people. Yes, I knew rooms were being used for something wrong. Yes, I kept showing up anyway because rent was due. and Baton Rouge didn't care how I felt about myself. I drink less now, which sounds like a hopeful line, but isn't as redemptive as it ought to be. Mostly it just means I like remembering what I ignored with a little more detail. Every few months I still check missing persons databases for Odessa Pike. Sometimes I spell the last name before I even realize I've opened the page again. The worst part is not just that I looked away, it's that I got good at looking away. I don't trust that about myself anymore. I don't trust the part of me that can turn one bad sign into paperwork and one worse sign into somebody else's problem. And I never learned whether room 214 was one ugly little stop all by itself, or just one room in something that ran all the way up and down that refinery corridor. Story 3. The next account is quieter on the surface, which is part of why it bothers me as much as it does. I was standing in an upstairs hallway with a pair of kitchen scissors in one hand, staring at a bedroom door that had been tied shut with fishing line. Not rope, not a proper latch. Thin, clear fishing line, looped from the doorknob to a brass hook in the trim like somebody was trying to keep the door from breathing open. At the time, I actually smiled. Not because it was funny exactly, but because when you do overnight residential security in old houses, people leave you weird instructions all the time. Don't touch the piano. Water the fern, but not too much. If the basement alarm chirps twice, ignore it. It does that. Rich people with old houses can make ordinary things feel ceremonial. Still, I remember reaching out to test the line and stopping myself because it felt like touching something in a museum. The house smelled like cedar polish and old carpet padding. Outside, through the transom window at the end of the hall, I could hear tree frogs and one of those distant freight trains that sounds far away until it doesn't. Every framed family photo along that hall had been turned face down against the wall. That should have bothered me first. My name's Talia. I was in my early 20s then, doing overnight property security for a small agency in Savannah. Mostly storm checks and vacancy coverage in historic neighborhoods when owned or out of town or in hospital care. This one was in Ardsley Park, behind one of those gates that exists mostly to reassure people with hydrangeas. Big old house, tidy from the curb, dim in that expensive way inside. The homeowner, Geraldine Mott, had gone for a medical stay and gave the office a page of instructions. 2 of them had her niece rolling her eyes when she handed them to me. Never enter the upstairs west bedroom. Never answer the landline after midnight. Mirelle, the niece, said Aunt Geraldine was dramatic, and I should just make sure the windows stayed shut if a storm rolled through. I said fine. I wasn't being paid to litigate family eccentricities. I actually liked those jobs. I was comfortable alone, maybe too comfortable. I used to collect old house keys from properties I'd worked, if owners said they were junk keys or old copies headed for the trash. Skeleton keys, tiny cabinet keys, weird little brass mailbox keys. I liked imagining who used to carry them and what they opened when the house still belonged to somebody else in a more ordinary way. That first evening, I found a whole kitchen drawer of them. Tangled old keys, rubber bands, expired coupons, a church bulletin, the normal archaeology of somebody's life. I sat at the breakfast nook, sorting them into little groups, while eating crackers out of my own lunch container and making notes for no reason other than I enjoyed it. 1 long iron key with a bow shaped like a teardrop, 3 nearly identical Yale keys with chipped blue caps, a little brass one that probably opened a secretary desk. There were face-down family photos all over the house, mantel, upstairs hall, side tables. Not every photo, which somehow would have been easier to explain. Just enough that once I noticed, I kept noticing. A wedding portrait turned over in the den. A school picture face down in the upstairs sitting room. A framed black and white shot of 2 women on a porch turned toward the wallpaper. I told myself Geraldine was grieving somebody. That made sense. Houses get rearranged around grief in ways that look odd from the outside. Around midnight, I made another round upstairs and paused at the west bedroom door, fishing line still taut. The doorknob cold under my fingers. I remember thinking the setup looked too deliberate to be decorative, like someone wanted proof if the door had been opened. Then the grandfather clock downstairs stopped ticking, not for long, just enough that I noticed the absence. 4 seconds later, the landline rang. 1 ring, then nothing. I stood at the upstairs landing, listening to the sound settle through the house. Tree frogs outside, air moving through old vents, distant train horn. Then the clock started again. 4 minutes later, same thing. Clock paused, one ring. Silence. By the third time, curiosity had got the better of whatever professionalism I was pretending to have. I went into the front hall and answered on the first ring. A woman said very quietly, "Did she finally leave the room open?" I said. "Who is this?" The line went dead. If you're listening to that and thinking, "Okay, that was your cue to leave," yes, I agree with you now. At the time, it still felt like family drama wearing a weird costume. Old house, controlling older relative, inheritance fight, prank calls. All of that seemed more reasonable than anything else. The call schedule did not help. Every 4 minutes exactly, and every time the grandfather clock stopped ticking for a few seconds first. Not the whole house power, not the lamps, just that clock. I checked the back of it like that would told me something. It told me I didn't know how grandfather clocks work. So I called Mirelle. She answered half asleep, then very awake when I said I had a problem. Once I explained, she laughed in this embarrassed way and said there had been family drama for years over an estranged daughter. Her exact words were, "If somebody's still doing this inheritance nonsense, I'm going to lose my mind." She said relatives liked to harass Geraldine, that everybody had strong opinions about who had been cut out of what, and that I should ignore the phone and please not feed into it. Relief is a powerful drug when you're alone in somebody else's house. I took it immediately. I went back to my rounds. I even felt a little stupid for being rattled. Then on the next pass upstairs, one of the family portraits had been turned around. It had been face down before, like the others. Now it was facing out toward the hallway, not hanging straight on the wall, tilted slightly, as if someone had picked it up and set it back down in a hurry. The woman in the photo looked a little like Geraldine, only younger, standing beside a car with one hand shielding her eyes from sun. I carried that image around for the next hour trying to find a boring explanation for it. Maybe I misremembered which ones were turned. Maybe the frame shifted when the vent kicked on. Maybe I'd rotated myself by brushing past. All possible. None good. The west bedroom door kept pulling at my attention anyway. This is the part where I did the selfish thing. I knew the instruction. I knew it was likely tied to grief. And I decided my curiosity mattered more in that moment than respecting whatever pain had arranged itself behind that door. I told myself I was making sure there wasn't somebody inside the room placing calls, or that I had a duty to inspect anything unsecured in a vacant property. But the honest reason is simpler. I wanted to know. I cut the fishing line. The room smelled closed up like paper and stale perfume. Heavy cull curtains, one twin bed, a dresser with no mirror, boxes stacked along the wall. On the bed were dozens of unopened letters, all addressed to Geraldine Mott in the same hand, but from a daughter the family, according to Mirelle, had said was dead in the late 2000s. A lot of them had recent postmarks, some only months old. I sat down and started sorting them by date because apparently once I violate one boundary, I like to get organized about it. Taped beside the bed was a newspaper clipping about a woman missing from a psychiatric facility under a different surname entirely. Similar face. Not an exact certainty from the grainy print, but enough that my chest tightened in a way I didn't have a nice label for. Then I opened the last letter. Inside was a recent photograph. Geraldine, very clearly Geraldine, standing outside the same house, same front steps, same ironwork, looking older than in the other pictures, but absolutely herself. On the back, in the same handwriting as the envelopes, were the words, "You still won't let me come home." That was the second peek, the real one. Because up until then I could still tell myself I was looking at the leftovers of a family story. Old lies, misfeeled grief, a relative pretending to be dead or undead in some legal sense. Ugly, but ordinary ugly. The photograph collapsed that distance. Somebody connected to that room was still present recently. Somebody was sending letters under at least 2 different names. And somebody in that house had been turning photos around to manage a person who had maybe never been gone the way they said. I photographed everything with my phone. The letters, the clipping, the photo, the postmarks. Then I put it all back as close as I could remember it and left before dawn. Not finished shift. Left the property. I didn't wait for replacement coverage. I didn't leave a note on the kitchen counter. I locked the door, got in my car, and drove until I was somewhere with fluorescent lights and I didn't want. You can call that unprofessional. It was, I didn't care. Later that morning, I learned Geraldine had checked herself out of medical care the same night I entered the room. Mirelle called me in tears first, then angry, then pleading. She asked what exactly I'd seen. I told her enough to make it clear I wouldn't be taking another assignment there. She got very quiet and said, "Please don't discuss this with anyone. The family already buried her once. I still don't know what that sentence means in the way I want it to mean. Legally, emotionally, publicly. Pick one." After that, I stopped collecting house keys. I still have the ones from before in a glass jar somewhere, but I don't enjoy them now. I don't really enjoy imagining strangers' histories at all. It turns out some houses don't keep memories. They keep negotiations. I also kept one photograph from that room, which I'm not proud of. Not the Geraldine one. A different one from the box, half out of focus, with part of the front walk-in frame. I slid it into a book on my shelf, and every so often I take it out and check the background for some detail I missed the first 10 times. I never figured out why several of those letters used two completely different surnames for the supposedly dead daughter while sharing the exact same handwriting. Story 4. The last story is the one I still hear when a radio spits static at the wrong time. I was under the loading ramp, trying not to breathe loud enough to give myself away. Loose gravel kept shifting under my knees every time I moved, and there was this slow metal tapping above me. Not frantic, not searching fast, just a patient little tap against the guardrail like somebody had all night to find out whether I was still there. Diesel fumes from the bypass road had drifted under the ramp, and the cold desert air made them feel sharper, almost metallic in the back of my throat. Then my own name came through the scanner. Softly, Reuben. Not shout out distorted enough to miss, just my name spoken on the work frequency by somebody who sounded like they were leaning close to the mic and smiling. That happened 3 nights after I first noticed the white pickup. I was doing contract overnight security along the southbound way station bypass off Interstate 84, out in Umatilla County during one of those highway resurfacing jobs that turn miles of road into cones, temporary barriers, and men in reflective gear pretending any of it is under control. My part wasn't complicated. Trailer office, access watch, equipment checks, and making sure random drivers didn't wander past barricades because they believed in shortcuts more than signage. I'm older than most guys doing that kind of work, old enough that silence on a night road gets into me more than it should. I kept an old police scanner in my truck cab, barely functional because I don't like long dead stretches when I'm parked by myself. It hissed more than it helped, but hiss is at least company. The first time I saw the white pickup, it was parked beyond the barricades with the headlights off. No company logo, no permit placard, nothing. Just sitting there where nobody authorized should been. I assumed state inspectors. They like to show up unannounced and make contractors nervous. I told myself that and moved on. Then I saw the same truck at another job site up the corridor the next week. Same shape, same dull white body, same crack in the left tail light housing. Again, no company markings. Again, no trouble. A few of the other guards noticed it too, but nobody cared because it never rolled through the active lane and never came right up on us. If you've done roadside work, you know how much weirdness gets filed under probably nothing, because otherwise you'd burn yourself out in 2 shifts. Still, I started watching for it. One dawn I saw it leave our site heading south. 30 minutes later it came back from the northbound direction. There was no nearby turnaround that made sense for that timeline, not without doubling way out and back. I even checked the map on my phone because I dislike becoming the old guy with theories. But no, unless that driver had wings or a second identical truck, it didn't add up. I mentioned it to Nolan Creel, the other contract guard rotating the same stretch with me. Nolan was younger, nervous laugh, always chewing the inside of his cheek, drove a truck held together by patriotic stickers and zip ties. He shrugged and said maybe it was a survey crew running side roads, possible. Weak, but possible. Then the scanner stuff started. I'd hear fragments of our private conversations played back a few seconds after we said them. Not live overlap, delayed, little pieces. You lock the north barrier yet. Then 3 beats later, Through the speaker, my own voice saying, "You lock the north barrier yet?" The first couple times I blamed crosstalk, bad equipment, some leftover transmission caught in the unit. Then it kept happening. Whole phrases, repeated back with a slight delay, as if someone nearby was recording us and keying the mic just to let us hear ourselves. That gets inside you fast, by the way. Hearing your own words come back when you didn't say them. I started suspecting Nolan, because what else did I have? Someone with access, someone on site, someone who knew the frequencies. Fear likes a face it can point at. Every time I said Nolan Creel's name near the scanner, it spit a burst of static. Not huge, just a nasty little crackle. You can laugh at that if you want. I probably would if it happened to somebody else, but after the fourth or fifth time, when a machine seems to react to one particular name, your thinking gets less elegant. So I accused him. Not directly at first, little pushes. Asked if he'd shared frequencies with anybody. Asked if he had buddies pulling pranks. Asked why the white pickup seemed to show up on nights he rotated through. He denied all of it, but he looked scared in a way I read as guilty because I needed him to be one of those things. When I mentioned the pickup straight out, he got pale and started saying he didn't know what I was talking about too quickly. That was my moral failure in this. I wanted one trustworthy explanation so badly that I decided a coworker had to fit inside it. Then one night I came back from the portable toilet by the barrier and found the trailer office wrong. Not robbed, not tossed, just wrong. A pen moved from the clipboard to the windowsill. The incident log turned 90 degrees. My thermos, which I'd left by the radio charger, now sitting in the center of the desk beside a piece of paper. "You keep noticing us," that was all it said. No theft, no forced drawer. Whoever had been in there had enough time and comfort to touch things for effect and leave. Later that same shift, Nolan went missing. He was supposed to check out the far barricade and call back in 10 minutes. Never did. I drove out with my light bar on and found his reflective vest near the cones. Not torn, not bloody, just dropped. His truck keys were still in the trailer, wallet too. Which made no sense because Nolan loved that truck more than most men love their children. He wasn't walking off anywhere without keys unless he really meant to come back in seconds. Dispatch kept telling me to hold position. I kept not doing that. By then, the white pickup had turned from a curiosity into a location. I saw it parked up beneath the inactive way station scale house where the old loading ramp cast a shadow big enough to hide under. I pulled up too close, got out with my flashlight, and called out, "Dumb move, real dumb." Two separate voices answered me from inside the cab, except they weren't really answering. They were playing distorted scanner audio of my own earlier conversations, bits with dispatch, bits with Nolan. My voice, his voice cut and replayed like somebody had made a bad song out of the shift. I backed up. The pickup door opened just enough for dark movement, and that was enough for me. I went under the loading ramp because it was the closest cover that wasn't open road. Which brings me back to the tapping. I had called for help more than once by then, but the site had so much equipment interference and dead patches that I couldn't tell what had gotten through. The scanner on my hip was alive with little pops and ghosts. Above me, footsteps paced once, then stopped. "Ruben," the voice said again over the radio. Then another voice, my voice this time, said, "He's underneath it right now." That transmission came over a channel only on-site guards should have had access to. I don't know if I've got a clean sentence for what that did to me. My hand stopped working right. I remember trying to unclip the radio and fumbling it twice. My jaw hurt because I'd been holding my teeth together without realizing it. And more than fear, honestly, it was the feeling that the normal explanations had all stepped out at once and left me with nothing sturdy to stand on. Then highway patrol finally rolled in. Not subtle. Full wash of lights across the scale house and the bypass road. Whoever was above me moved off fast. Gravel kicked. An engine started. I slid backward out from under the ramp just in time to watch the white pickup, pulling away slow, almost lazy, as if the driver didn't mind being seen now. The officers found tampered construction radios later, extra equipment stashed where it shouldn't have been, and enough evidence that somebody had been patching into guard communications to make everybody very serious. They took statements, searched the area, ran plates that didn't stick to anybody useful, and treated me like a man who was lucky to be annoyed instead of hurt. Nolan turned up alive the next day, which I should say, shaken, embarrassed, and not very helpful. He claimed somebody grabbed him from behind near the barricades, took his radio, and dumped him a few miles out on a frontage road after threatening him. Maybe that's true. Maybe some of it is. He never came back to that contract either way. As for me, I was done with overnight road work after that. Not security entirely, but that kind of distance, that much black highway between you and another human being. No, I won't do jobs farther than 30 minutes from town now. People can call that old age or nerves. Doesn't matter. I sleep better. I still have the broken scanner in my garage on a shelf behind paint cans. It doesn't even hold a charge right anymore. I've thought about throwing it away more than once, but every time I get close, it feels less like cleaning out junk and more like raising my hand. 6 months after all that, another former highway guard contacted me and said he'd heard delayed recordings of his own voice over a work scanner near Boise.